The Sleepers, Part 3, Ray. Chapter 22, Pairing. Few sleeper-client pairs follow each other as closely as Ray and I did. Despite the anguish over changing one sleeper, natural events like school and relocation force many clients to sever ties along the way. But where feasible, a client will hold to his or her sleeper as long as possible, even until retirement. There was never any doubt that Ray and I were stuck to each other. We had passed the test of university, a frequent breaking point. Joint employment was a guarantee for us, meaning Ray and I were inseparable. Our university contemporaries hustled and bargained to find work while we waited for the start date of our foregone conclusion. It would have been easy to be cocky in our state, knowing a job was imminent, but the predestined nature of our position felt more like a prison sentence than a reward. Hope and mystery had played so little part in our lives. I had accepted my destiny as a child. For Ray, it always seemed an irritating surprise. I had suspected our fathers would require standard vetting and interviews to teach us the corporate recruiting process. But instead, we each received congratulatory letters welcoming us to the family business and stating the modest starting salaries. We had to rise through the ranks like anyone else, but such formality seemed more for show than good practice. Codified nepotism ensured our place in the company, barring any career-limiting debacle. Ray entered the graduate office beaming over his offer. How he could be so excited for a destiny decided at conception baffled me. The office was as dank as any dormitory, an unkempt place of refuge for overworked, underpaid college students. We'd found ourselves here more often than the lab, while wrapping up our dissertations. "Did you get the letter?" he asked anxiously. "Yes, of course," I responded dryly, swiveling my chair so I could face him. "I found it all rather—" But before I could complete my sentence with an adjective, perhaps cold, or typical, or perfunctory, Ray interjected, "Wonderful!" Okay, not my first choice of words. Thankfully, in our marriage of force, Ray's zeal for life deflected much of my sarcasm, keeping him ignorantly blissful of my sulking. Approaching my desk, he slid over my neighbor's chair and continued with unstoppable enthusiasm. "We're going to the Frontier Science Division. They could have put us anywhere in the office, and they've trusted us with the new Discovery Unit. Can you believe it?" I felt sick. Ray and I had each assumed we would be in the same group. My plans rested on the edge of impossible hope, a hope intrinsically dependent on proximity to Ray. He waited on my response, expecting equal enthusiasm. I could not deliver. What had gone wrong? I had miscalculated. "I'm not going to the Frontier Science Division," I stammered. "They, our fathers, split us up. I'm starting in the drug development group." My head sifted through potential outcomes and disasters if SleepFree separated me from Ray. My entire plan was about Ray. Drug development was the right group for the plan, but without Ray, it was hopeless. Changing the world, exacting revenge, whatever it was that drove this vendetta, it all required me and Ray, not me or Ray alone, but the two of us, together, bound by some terrible fate. Cumulus required us both. I had changed my research, making me a perfect choice for drug development. Had that decision backfired? The news likewise shocked Ray. That can't be right," he exclaimed. "HR must have made a mistake. We stick together. We're a package deal. We have always been together. I'll talk to my dad. He can correct this error." Strange how much we needed each other, and for such antithetical reasons. You would think we really were friends. I replied bluntly, "There's no mistake. You don't screw up assignments for the children of the president and the board. Our fathers made this choice, not HR. I'm going to talk to my dad immediately." I closed my eyes in frustration to signal the end to our conversation, and swiveled back to my work. Seemed like an appropriate time to visit John Jr. Chapter 23, The Rain. The problem with parables is that they come back at you. Good healing in the form of traditional drugs cures a patient with no afterthought. Patient gets better, forgets the experience, erases the knowledge of the medicine, and lives happily until the next sickness. Parables, be they scriptural or from a pedantic father, boomerang back again and again and again, bludgeoning the recipient until one understands. A master parabolist injects new meaning into discarded parables, justifying yet another use each time. Telephone communication seemed too impersonal for the acerbic inquisition I planned for my father. I was no longer a boy. He was not going to bully me with his guilt. Cornell commencement ceremonies were as boring as I expected. As the crowds dispersed on conclusion, the Sleep College families made their way to the formidable brownstone chemistry building. Much larger buildings had replaced its smaller neighbors to house all the students wanting to study sleep, but the classic building remained with an inner atrium used for gatherings. The department had gone all out. Nothing like the normal cheap appetizers and bottled water. Never miss a chance to impress SleepFree executives, even if they were already grossly committed to the school. My father and Richard Madsen spent considerable time catching up with Dr. Santos. The three laughed as friends, while social climbers and wide-eyed students crowded around trying to join the laughs like they belonged. I tended to think Lucius's admiration belonged with me, but he had been our father's advisor as well, many years ago. Watching John Jr., I could see the older I got, the more we looked alike. People had said so for years, but I always clung to the fact that since I had my mom's eye color, I would look more like her family. But there was no denying it now. I would fill his job, I had taken his place in the lab, and I even looked like him. Long nose, rich brown hair minus the gray, tall with medium build, long ears that clung to the skull, etc. At least our personalities were never going to be the same. I cornered him as the crowds began dispersing and pushed him into a private study room. My mother was distracted with Ray's mom buying me a narrow window to slip away. With my most accusatory tone, I commenced without sitting. "Dad, how could you split us up? Ray and I have always been together. I don't understand why we are in separate groups. I only know that such a divorcement is your doing." He seemed taken back, acting like this conversation was a total surprise, but maintained his calm, cool behavior. "John, Ray's father had an equal, if not greater, part in the decision. You must understand that he is training his heir. I do not control everything. Let's go find your mother and take off." "No, Dad. You don't get to shift blame to the Madsens. His father may have selected frontier science, but you made my decision. You had to." I verged on hysteria and desperation against his condescension, but this was serious, critically serious. He kept his distance, still unsure how to ever calm his son. "I really thought you wanted freedom from Ray. You endured college because you felt you had no choice. I'm making this next choice for you. I'm giving you the gift of separation." "Dad, that's not your choice. We already had this argument when I went to school. I am sticking with Ray." My emotions gathered and evolved into sternness. "We are stuck. I am stuck. And that's how I want it." I intended to finish my course. My father was not going to disrupt me. "Then it's even more important that I intervene, son. Remember my story about the umbrellas?" Ray and sleeping may top my least favorite things list, but hearing parables when I was angry, especially recycled parables, came a close third. I was flustered and irate. "Yes, Dad, I remember," I growled. "You can tell everything about a person by how they handle rain." I detected a smile on his face at my remembrance, and it irritated me even more. He continued regardless, leaning against the wall, since I still stood. "Good job, John. You were listening. Well, what you may have missed from the parable is the antecedent, the rain. In the sunlight, all those people look so much alike, busy people moving to and fro. Then the rain comes, and we can distinguish character. When the drizzle starts, we see who is quick to extend their umbrella, or who is unprepared. As the drizzle compounds to heavy rain, we see those who are fearless, those who are antsy, and those who are afraid of the rain. People need adversity, or this life would be boring and pointless. If you feel you need Ray so much, then it's time for a season of separation. See what you can do with a bit of distance. Will you hide under your shelter? Will you traverse the storms with a weathered umbrella? Or will you dance in the rain, embracing the showers? It's your turn to decide. I'm buying your freedom with a bit of rain. A freedom I never had. Don't squander it." I could not respond without crying or shouting, and I couldn't decide which emotion to feel. Instead, I ground my teeth and stormed out, the boomerang having bashed my head another time. I hated that boomerang. Compensation programs had evolved since the inception of borrowed sleep to accommodate the gamut of sleeper-client relations. In jobs like mine, I was allowed a shortened workday to allow sufficient time to sleep for Ray. My contract, something I deemed artificial and alien given my inherent right or obligation to work for SleepFree, detailed 2 pay grades. I was entitled to the salary of a scientist, scaled down by my reduced hours, plus an additional compensation for my sleeper job, which was paid at a lower rate than my scientist role, but better than most sleepers. I actually made more money than Ray in our first years, due to the combined relative pay components. 3 years had passed since Samantha's departure. We persevered through the mire of dissertation writing, classwork, and graduation, and could now start in the real world. It was my first chance to finally rest. As a student, I had to attend classes, sleep for Ray and myself, until Lucius took over, and complete homework in the in-between hours. Even without Lucius, no classwork meant I could take a break. I immediately transitioned to the greater research, the path to finish off Ray and find my cumulus drug. There's no rest for the weary. Ray returned to his parents' home after graduation. He found no reason to maintain the independence established after nearly a decade away. Given his inheritance and access to his parents, money was no issue for Ray, even as a starting scientist. He could purchase the highest-end apartment in the last remaining vibrant city sector, probably the whole city if needed. Yet the decision to return home rather than venture out was blatantly obvious. It was his home. They were his parents. That's where he should be. I knew when I left Fort Cornell I would never again live under my parents' roof. Sunday dinners were mandatory, but otherwise I steered clear. I may have been starting my career, but there was no need for a parsimonious lifestyle. I purchased a 2-bedroom apartment downtown with inheritance funds, 5 blocks from SleepFree's headquarters and labs. My private apartment afforded me the solitude to commence my true research. Time was precious. I could waste very little on commuting. I decorated my new home with Carl's artwork. I had put it in special environmentally controlled storage during college. Now his artwork lined my walls, and the overflow still filled my small garage storage. He would not want the art shared beyond my private control. Sleep installations at both home and work provided flexibility to clock Ray's 7 hours anywhere, anytime. If I slept at home, I merely transported the sleep goods 5 blocks to Ray's in-office station. On weekdays, Ray always downloaded at work, usually mid-afternoon as a sort of supercharged siesta. Weekends required logistical planning, but I still slept. After 2 decades of connection, it was difficult for Ray to handle most substitute sleepers. He struggled during holidays without me out of necessity, but I was his drug, and he would not have me gone long. Most sleepers worked 7 days a week. The SSC modified the sleeper work week as a 7 days a week, 7 hours per rest time length before triggering overtime. Deviation from the traditional 40 hours was justified by the ease of the job. Frequently we worked Saturdays, enjoying the added quiet when few were present. On Sundays the butler arrived for shipment, or I delivered my soul before our family dinner, just like the mail or milk. God and the Sabbath were a luxury relegated by progress, and poisoned by our families. If God allowed the children of Israel to sleep on the Sabbath, then how many more stripes could one receive for 7 hours more? Chapter 24. Chinese Food. We perpetuated our Chinese lunch ritual from university to the workplace. Forced separation through different work assignments, our paternal punishment, stripped us of our convenient daily interface. We were accustomed to regular contact, having spent much of at least my waking hours together since elementary school. Without a mechanism for regular contact other than sleep exchange, we succumbed to the lunch date. For having the world at our fingertips, we only ate at dingy dives. Upscale Chinese restaurants never satisfied that certain MSG craving. Our particular favorite, just 4 blocks from Sleep Towers, had few patrons, ever. Solitude meant we could feel a little more at ease talking about everything, given no one could shut Ray up. I treated lunch as an opportunity to ensure the puppet never danced too far. As for Ray, he valued my apathy in the face of his eternal drama, and he got to practice his Mandarin. On each Wednesday, a negotiated day that balanced the work week, we convened for cheap meat plus unnamed special sauce. Conversing with Ray was like mining for gold nuggets. It was a mind-numbing process of siphoning through profitless rock. But between the blathering, One found nuggets worth hearing, validating the $9.99 ulcer. The topic today mimicked a do loop, a repeat cycle reminiscent of the horoscopic fortune cookie Samantha disaster. It seemed this loop would not or could not end until Ray found himself married. I read the Chinese calendar horoscopes for the 1,000th time and thought about whether Ray really should look to the horse or the dog. "John, have I told you about Gabby yet?" Ray asked as we waited for the menus. I knew nothing of her, and my lack of attention wasn't to blame. Ray knew of my ignorance, but preferred this gentle segue versus a straight dive into his emotions. It was a congenial nod to my disinterest that he had better detected ever since Sam left. "No, I don't think you've mentioned her before." Our waitress distributed the menus, and I gave my usual cursory glance, knowing every other week I ate General Tso's chicken, and it was that week. Ray had his form of courtesy, I had mine. "She's the one," sighed Ray. "This time I know it." I dropped my menu and shook my head in cynical disbelief. "Ray, everyone is the one. She's not it. You should know that by now." Hearing about the one stopped catching my interest years ago. Water and hot tea arrived. She had stopped asking for our drink order months ago. The menus were simple respect for me, but another sea of indecision for Ray. "No, John," he said while shaking the menu at me. "This is it. We've been dating for the last few weeks. I hadn't brought it up yet as I knew you would be skeptical." Well, that was improvement, albeit unconvincing. "You've made it to several weeks lots of times. I'm still not convinced. Duty required me to be a pain, plus it felt great." I just wished he would pick his lunch special and be ready for the waitress. "She's not like the other girls. She's kinder, humbler, and she's a redhead." Now I was interested. Without knowing it, Ray was describing the skipping metaphor and falling dangerously close to the plunge. He was learning from his catastrophes. When I finally met Gabby at the office, it became perfectly clear he had found his match. And it wasn't about looks or wealth. She was a mousy girl, unaccustomed to the lifestyle of the uber-rich. Describing her as a redhead was an understatement. A giant mop of frizzy redness rested on her beanpole figure. She kept untamable curls pulled back in a bun that looked like a red tornado striking a field of roses. One rogue curl hung at the side. Everything screamed unashamedly Irish, with matching freckles and emerald eyes, and she was disgustingly amiable. Gabby would truly be trouble. The waitress interrupted for our order, and I answered without thinking, "General Tso's chicken with fried rice." She already knew. We had been frequenting the dive every Wednesday for a year. She impatiently took Ray's order, prodding him to just pick something, even offering what was most popular, and then left annoyed with Mandarin curses. He continued, taking my silence as the right to proceed. "Gabby works for the company in client communications. Her job is to be soothing and affable, a natural fit for her personality. She's not some rich girl arranged by my parents. I'm not sure she even realized my connection to the company when we met at a work symposium last month." She surely did. Everyone knew Ray, in and out of the company. No one at SleepFree could possibly be as isolated or naive as Ray Matson, except maybe Gabby, an attribute I only realized later when watching these two inept lovebirds. "Well, how do you really know? Samantha seemed like the one, and she nearly ruined you. How can you tell?" I really did want to know his answer. My plan depended on Ray. His life was my life. My plan relied on his love life, at least partially. I had counted on perpetual bachelorhood and didn't need someone too close driving us apart. With careful planning, I could of course change the plans, but after so many years, I preferred things just go my way. It was much easier than resetting the chess pieces. Encouraged by my questions, though unaware of the intent, Ray entered a monologue on Gabby to make Romeo beg for poison. Thanks to the precognitive cooking capabilities, though, of cheap Chinese restaurants, the food came mercifully fast, and with the food came a reprieve from Ray's talking. No one can resist steaming hot meat with rice and some nondescript sauce.